When did you first realize you had sickle cell disease?
I was 2 years old when I found out. What happened was my brother, who was 5 years old, had his first crisis, and we didn't know what was going on. We brought him to the hospital, and the doctors didn't really know at first what was going on, and they realized that it was a sickle cell crisis and had him tested to to confirm it. And then they decided to test the rest of the siblings. And I found out that I also had it, and I had a younger brother who also was confirmed to have sickle cell. And then we had a sister who was not affected and a sister who was a carrier.
Oh, wow. So, um, so you have it's just always been a part of your life.
It has. It's always been a part of my life. And growing up, I didn't really have a lot of trouble with it. I had pain and I had the normal symptoms that go with sickle cell. My brother really had a harder time. He spent more time in the hospital than I did, and and my younger brother actually passed away at 6 months old from a sickle cell crisis. Back then in 1964, they still really didn't know about sickle cell, how to treat it, and what to do. And so, unfortunately, he passed away at 6 months. So everyone was still trying to figure out, how do you take care of this disease?
Yeah. Can you, for anybody who may listen to your story, can you just describe what a crisis is for you related to sickle cell?
Okay, for me, my crisis is really just severe pain. It could happen in your abdomen, your back, your hips. And for me, mostly it's like in my joints. I can get very severe pain in my abdomen where it just feels like kind of knife sticks or pinpricks, and then throbbing pain. And there's nothing you can do to really settle it. And so as a kid, I would just lie very still. I would lay down and I would find a position that I could get comfortable enough in where the pain would not be quite as great. And I would try to stay in that position, because the minute I would move, it would start all over again with the throbbing and the pain. I would have to try to settle it again. So a crisis could be anything from severe pain, and that's what lands my brother in the hospital a lot. But I never had it to where I went to the hospital. I would manage it at home, and you just kind of take in fluids. You try to lay still. You try to keep rested until it subsides. It can last anywhere from a day or weeks, and it's funny, and it can occur at any time. And I don't know if that gives you an idea, but yeah, it can happen at any time, and it can last anywhere from, hey, one day to, I remember when I was in high school, and my biology teacher told us, now we're getting ready to go into genetics, so I don't want anyone to miss class, because it's very important that you're here to get everything. And it was that very day that I went home with a sickle cell crisis, and I stayed out of school for 2 weeks.
Oh.
And stayed in bed for 2 weeks.
Yeah. Is there something that triggers a crisis?
Yes, I know for me, what triggers it is stress or anxiety. I notice when during my working years, I'm retired now, but during my working years, if I felt pressured or pressed to meet deadlines or to get to certain places at a time, if I'm pressured, it does trigger it for me. And I had a lot of episodes where the pressure or the stress would trigger such severe pain that I would have to lay down until it passes. And it would happen. It could happen. I've had it happen at work. I had it happened when I've come home from work. I've had it at church. I mean, it's wherever I go. And a lot of times I'm in a position where I can't go lay down. I might be in the middle of a grocery store, or I might be in church. So it has happened in various places, but mine is always triggered by stress, and anxiety will trigger it.
Things
So I
that are
try
hard
not
to
to pressure
avoid.
myself. It is hard to avoid, and I try to not pressure myself when I have somewhere to go. Like if it's a special occasion and you're getting ready, and I'm trying not to feel pressured to get dressed, to put my makeup on, to hurry up and do this and get that. Because if I start doing that, then it starts to trigger, and then it only will slow me down, because then I will have to stop everything and lay down, because I won't be able to move or do anything.
Yeah. Let
Hmm.
me ask you, do you have kids?
I'm sorry, say that.
Do you mind me asking, you have kids?
I do have kids. I have two daughters. I have one is 34 and one is 36.
Oh, okay.
Hmm.
Did now is it something that is real passed on or not? Because you said you had one
Yeah,
sister who was a carrier, but she didn't have it.
the one with the carrier, if she married someone who didn't have it, so none of her kids are carriers.
Oh,
And
okay.
now both of my daughters are carriers because of me having the disease.
Okay. But if they married somebody who wasn't a carrier, then the kids should be all right if they had or have kids?
If they had someone who wasn't a carrier, there is a chance that they could have a
Yeah.
child with sickle cell.
Oh,
And
okay.
so, because I'm not sure about the odds on how that works, but yes, there is a chance that they could also have a child or children. Now, my oldest daughter, she has three boys, so I have three grandsons, and I believe her oldest grandson is a carrier like she is, and the other two are normal hemoglobin.
Oh,
And then
okay.
my youngest daughter, she has no kids.
Oh, okay. I'd like to back up a little bit. Can you just tell me what it was like for you growing up and having these crises? You know, how did that affect your childhood?
It really affected my childhood in the way that I felt very isolated, because I didn't share the fact that I had sickle cell, because for some reason I was embarrassed by it. I was embarrassed to have that disease. And I really didn't want the pity when I would tell someone. It seemed like they thought I was incapable of doing things. And I didn't want to be seen as incapable or pitied. So I would keep it to myself. So I kind of grew up isolated and lonely, because they didn't understand, if I wasn't feeling well, what was really going on. So I just would kind of seem like a very shy and lonely child. And they just, oh, well, she's just shy. But really,
Yeah.
I was just in my own pain. So
Yeah.
it did affect my childhood, yes.
You know, when you were young, did you ever have crises at school? Did it?
I did. I would have crises at school, and mostly I would just tell my teacher, oh, my stomach hurts. Is it possible that I could go to the nurse? And then a lot of times the teacher would think it was my excuse to try to get my mom to come pick me up. Mm-hmm. And they would say, oh, well, you need to start telling her she needs to stay at school. And so I don't believe that my mom knew it was my sickle cell that was the issue. So she never told the teachers, well, she has sickle cell and she could be ill. And so that's why I felt isolated, because nobody knew. I never told the teachers. I know that now kids should inform their teachers, because that would give them information that they need. It's just like any child with an allergy. When you tell them, hey, I have a peanut allergy, everyone's aware and they make accommodations. And so it always seemed like My teachers thought that I wasn't happy at school. I was quiet. I was shy. I seemed lonely. And they said, well, she needs to stay in school and stop giving in to her being sick and trying to.
Yeah. But, you know, and in the 60s and 70s, because we're the same age, you know,
Yes.
it was a different time, too.
Right. It was.
You know, the people often didn't share things like that.
No. And like I told you about the story when I missed 2 weeks of the biology. And when I came back, my teacher was not very accommodating. I told him, I said, I was ill. I had a doctor's note that said I had sickle cell, and he was very uncaring and said, well, you missed this section and you're not going to probably pass this section, so I don't know what to do. You'll probably have to take biology again. And there was no compassion there to say, well, I'm sorry you have this illness and you were really sick.
How old were you?
I was, I think it was in 10th grade. So,
okay.
Yeah, 14, 15, I suppose.
Yeah, it has to be tough, you know, on a child to go through this, especially when you feel like you can't share it, you know.
Right. It's very tough.
Yeah. How and was I know there's probably not a lot of things that can be done today to treat it, but I think that they're making some headways. But what was there anything back in the 60s, 70s, 80s to treat the symptoms of sickle cell?
No, back then I didn't have anything like now. They have a regimen for the kids. I believe right away they start them on medication, that hydroxyurea, and that has made a difference in their crisis and getting through their childhood years. That wasn't available back then for us. So there was not really any pain. They didn't give us pain medication. They would, it was always, unless, of course, we ended up in the hospital. Then they would treat the pain with pain medication. But mine were never as severe as my brother's, to where they would say you need to be hospitalized. So I would have to kind of tough it out and just kind of get through it without any pain medication. They would just say, well, you know, rest and make sure you stay hydrated, drink lots of fluids, and stay in bed and stay quiet. So I became a reader. I just love to read because I spent a lot of time in bed, and I spent a lot of time sitting quiet because I couldn't do a lot of activities like the other kids, and I just felt isolated in that way, and I kind of lost myself in books, and I would read books after book after book, and that would kind of keep my mind off things to help me kind of get through it.
Yeah. Just real quick, while you're talking about this, what were some of your favorite books when you were a kid?
My most all-time favorite was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Oh, okay.
I still have that book today, and I just reread that book till almost it fell apart. And I love that book. And I loved Madeline. I used to read all the Pippi Longstocking books. I used to like the Frances books, Bedtime for Frances, Bread and Jam for Frances, all these about this little bear. And I just would just read everything.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So let me ask you this now. I know that from talking to other people, they have talked about, you know, facing, because it's almost exclusively a disease that affects people of color.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind me asking, have you felt like you have faced racism in the medical industry because you are Black, and this is a disease that affects mainly people who are Black?
Now, as an adult, I started having more trouble, and then I would have go to the ER, and a lot of times I was hospitalized. There was one time, and this is the only time that I faced that, and this was a hospital that my hematologist is a part of, and also I've been to that hospital to the ER many times before. But this particular time, I was in really bad crisis where I could barely walk. I could barely, get into the building. My husband was helping me. And so I told them right away that I had sickle cell and I was in crisis. And she checked me in. She started an IV, and then we went to the waiting area. And we waited forever. We just waited and waited. And that's when I believe, I don't even know how long it had been. And my husband kept asking, will she get called back? She's really in a lot of pain. And I don't know what happened. Either there was a nurse that saw my name and knew me from my doctor. And somehow all of a sudden things started to move. And they're like, oh, we're so sorry that you had to wait so long. And right away they brought me back. They got me in the bed. They got the ER doctor in, and then he gave me morphine and to help me calm down and relax. And then we got started. And I don't know what changed, but at first it was like, okay, just go sit over there, and we'll get to you when we get to you.
Yeah.
And I find out that that's not the protocol. And they say when someone comes in with sickle cell, they should be seen as people you should see first, as someone who's really critical. And that wasn't done. And it wasn't done at that time. And I don't know what happened, but after hours of waiting, then all of a sudden things moved, because I believe it was one of the nurses that came on board, said, oh, I know her, and why is she still sitting here out in the waiting area?
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry you experienced that. I can't imagine being in excruciating pain and not being tended to.
Yes.
That it's got to be a tough thing. So what would you like to say to anybody who might be in the healthcare industry or might know somebody who has sickle cell? What should they know?
Yes. What I believe they should know, and I believe they're beginning to understand better. We're not seeking pain medication. We're not seeking morphine for our own personal benefits. We're trying to get help for our pain. So when we're coming, and I know that was an issue with my brother. They thought that he was just a painkiller seeker. My brother suffered a whole lot more than I ever did with crises. My thing was my blood count would drop low, and I would have to get blood transfusions as I got older, but it used to drop low when I was a kid. I never got a transfusion, but it used to drop low, made me very weak and tired. So what I would like the healthcare professionals to know is that when someone comes in and say they have sickle cell and that they're in pain, believe that they really are in pain and they're not just seeking pain medicine. And I think it really sets a tone if they look at you in that way, that, oh, she's just here to get morphine. Oh, she just wants a shot. Oh, she just wants pain medicine. I have pain medicine that my doctor prescribes. I rarely use it unless I cannot stand the pain, unless I truly cannot stand the pain. Because I'm not trying to seek pain medication to just be on pain medication. I only use it when I really cannot bear it. So I just would like the healthcare professionals to really believe them when they say that they're in pain and that they're not just there seeking some kind of relief, like, oh, I just really want this morphine.
Right. Yeah. And, what should people like me know, about the disease, people you might work with or come in contact with, is there something that you feel like we should all know?
Yes, I believe that, and that comes with the person who has sickle cell sharing it with her coworkers or sharing it with others. And what I would like people to know, especially for me, I want people to know that, yes, I do have a chronic illness, and yes, it does. It has me in bed at some times, but I am a capable person. I can still do everything that everyone else does. I don't want to be treated like I cannot do this or seen as someone who's incapable. And as I noticed as an adult, when I started having more issues where I was in the hospital and I was down in from crises or pain, and I had my children, they were younger, and I would have my sister help me out a lot during that time. But sometimes my daughter played soccer, and sometimes the other parents kind of look like, oh, well, she's incapable because she's got an illness, so she can't really do these things. I don't want to be treated like I can't do anything. I want people. I had a coworker at my last job before I retired where I shared with her that I had sickle cell. She saw me in crisis one time and at my desk, and she knew right away what was going on, that I wasn't feeling well. And she said, oh, why don't you go? We had a quiet room in our office where it was cool, it was quiet, and we can go in there and sit. She says, I will, I'll hold the phones and I'll take care of everything. You just go sit in there for a few minutes and relax. And I did. And so she understood. She didn't treat me like I was incapable. She just said,
Right.
hey, you need to rest a little bit until you start to feel better. And it's okay. I'll look over your desk for you while you're doing that. So she didn't say like, oh my goodness, she's not going to be able to do her job because this is going on. She just said, hey, take a moment and rest. And that was the best thing, because most people want to just take over and say, oh, well, she can't do it, she's incapable. And I don't like to feel that way, and I don't want people to treat me that way.
Right. Understandable. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if, I once heard somebody who had cancer, and they said, I don't want people to look at me with cancer eyes, meaning,
right,
to look at me with pity or anything like that,
Exactly.
So and that really hit home, because I've known a few people who had, a serious illness, and they're like, please don't treat me differently.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And
treat me like you would treat anybody else. Yes, I have an illness, but treat me like you would anyone else. Yes.
Right. Yeah. And how often, how often do crises hit? And do they still hit as often as an adult as when you were a child, or more often?
As an adult, more often. When I was pregnant with my first child, that was the first time I ever had a transfusion. My blood count had gone really low, and they were concerned, so they gave me my first blood transfusion. And then after that, I didn't have to have any more blood transfusions. I had my second child with no issue. And I started getting pain crises a little bit more often as an adult. And now, as I'm getting older, of course, I'm getting them more often. And they're not, I'm not bouncing back as quickly as I used to. Now, I do get a blood transfusion every 4 weeks. So I have to continue on that regimen because my blood count tends to drop very low. So my doctor said, if we're doing this and keeping your blood count up, keep that hemoglobin up, that's how we can keep the crisis down. Because the new medications that are coming out are helping a lot of people. I tried one of the new ones, but it made me really sick. It made me about as sick as if I had a crisis. I ended up in bed. So he said, we're not doing that, so we'll get off of that medication. Hydroxyurea didn't work for me either. So there wasn't anything new that came out that I could take, except for just take your pain medication when it gets too bad, or, relax, stay in bed, do what you need to do. I found when I'm having a crisis, and this I read from one of the sickle cell newsletters, is a heated blanket. A heated blanket works very well for a crisis. So I have a heated blanket. When I feel one coming on, I put it on, and and it helps kind of soothe the pain. And that's kind of what I do now. If it's really bad, yes, I'll take some pain medication. But mostly I try to treat it with rest, relaxation, just not stressing out, just trying to stay quiet and use my heating blanket.
Yeah. Let me ask you, how was it when you were pregnant? Did you have crises while you were pregnant? And that
I know,
like an added burden there.
It was, because I was always told by the doctors not to have kids. You shouldn't have kids because you'll have all this trouble. It's not only for the child, but for me as well. Well, this can happen for you. This can happen for you. So, thankfully, actually, I really had a pretty easy pregnancy. I didn't really have any crisis during that time. And I don't know if it's because I was still rather young. I was 24. So those were like good years for me. Those were the years where I didn't suffer much. I didn't have a lot of crisis pain. I didn't have a lot of trouble with my sickle cell during that time frame. So I believe that that's when I believe that that's when I could get through that pregnancy. And then I had my second baby. I was 26. So I was still rather young. And I think that was a plus. Outside of having that blood transfusion, those were the only troubles. I didn't have any crisis during delivery. I didn't really have any afterwards. And I was able to kind of get through it all. And they were all surprised. The doctors were all like, oh, wow, this is wonderful. And they said I would have small babies. My first baby was 8 pounds, 6 ounces. So she was a pretty large baby.
Yeah.
And the other one was 7 pounds. So these are like normal birth rates. And so they were happy, but they made it clear that I should not have any more.
Yeah.
I should be thankful for the 2 that I had, and I did that well, and let's call it at that point.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I'm really happy to hear that, because when you were talking about it, and I thought, because some women just have problems with pregnancies anyway,
right?
And then to couple it with, severe pain from sickle cell, I can't imagine. But I'm a guy,
Right.
We probably don't handle pain nearly as well as women do.
And thinking back, I am thinking there was a time when I was pregnant with the second one, and we were moving. We were moving from one home to another home, and I don't know if I was just overly tired, and I'm not sure now if it really was a crisis, but I remember my friend having to come in and help with my daughter. She was 2 at. I remember just laying down and thinking, oh my goodness, am I going to get through this? Because I just felt like I couldn't push through. And so I don't know if it was a crisis or just tired from packing up, moving, having a
Yeah.
child, and you're pregnant, and just kind of dealing with all of that.
Yeah. I we're glad it wasn't so bad.
Yes.
Before we wrap up, let me ask you. You've mentioned your brother a few times. How is he doing?
My brother passed away at the age of 43.
Oh,
He
I'm
ended
so
up
sorry.
Yes, he ended up with getting his kidneys. He was in end stage renal failure, and he was getting dialysis, and he had a crisis. While he was at dialysis, they brought him to the hospital and found out that something was not right with his heart valve, and so he had to have surgery. And then just things kind of just went downhill from there. I think the sickle cell, the kidneys, everything just kind of hit him, and so he didn't make it.
Well, I am so sorry to hear that. That had to be tough.
Yes, because he was like my buddy.
Yeah.
We could commiserate with each other. We understood each other. We knew what each other was going through, and we
Right.
would always laugh about things that would go wrong with us. We'll say like, "Oh, we have this. Oh, yeah, that's right, because we have sickle cell," and we would just kind of laugh about it, like, "Oh, yeah, this is why." And so losing him was very difficult.
Yeah. Well, I'm so sorry to that for your loss there.
Well, thank you.
Is there anything else you would like to say to anyone who might hear this before we wrap up?
I guess the only thing I would say is when someone shares that they have sickle cell, just realize that they would like your support during times when they need it, but they don't want to be pitied, and they don't want to be treated as being incapable. Mainly just be there to do whatever. If it's just to sit with them, then do that. If it's to make sure that they're drinking enough fluids, then do that. Read with them, or bring them some nice music to listen to, or just be there and talk with them. Because a lot of times when you're in crisis, you really just have to lay down. You really just have to get in bed and kind of let it pass. And that's hard to do if you're just going to do it alone. And so just that support is really needed. Family support, friend support, it's really needed.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today about this, and I wish you good health.
Well, thank you, Scott. I enjoyed this chat with you as well.